Hi there, I'm Des.
And I'm Tim, and together Des and I head up the men's ministry Momentum Australia.
Momentum has multiple functions, but primarily our aim is to help men to succeed in life, to do life better.
We run a weekly radio show that goes all around Australia where we talk about anything and everything that relates to men.
And we encourage men to do life in community, to do life with other men where we can be accountable, we can be welcomed, we can be open and honest about what's happening in our world.
We'd love you to have a look around our website. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find a bunch of resources to help you on your journey and all of our previous episodes and topics.
We thank you for your interest in Momentum Australia, and we hope you enjoyed this video today.
Okay, well, welcome back to Momentum. Once again, it is fantastic to have you tuning in wherever you may be. Really great that you could spend some time with us, and I hope you're doing well as we step into a brand new year. Once again, I've got Des with me. How are you today, Des? You good?
I'm doing really well, man. It's great to be back in 2024. Much as I thought I would never reach 2024, here we are, which is fantastic. While we're talking about things in general, just let me mention our website, momentumaustralia.org. Lots of feedback, lots of information on there. All our previous podcasts are all on there, all 135 of them or something. Amazing. And so you can help us financially also through our website, and that would be greatly appreciated. And also don't forget our care line, which is 1-800-000-men. Easy to remember for men. 1-800-000-636. If you're doing life on your own and you need a safe and confidential conversation, please reach out to that care line. It's available 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. 1-800-000-636.
Yeah, and the YouTube, of course, Des, as we will mention, that's a brand new channel. It's got some videos on there like this one, where you can see us and not just hear us. So I encourage you to check out Momentum for Men on YouTube. And seriously, avail yourself of the care line if you need this year. Don't do life in isolation. Actually, may this be the year that you actually step into deeper relationships with your male friends, because it is super, super important that us guys don't do life on our own. And statistics show that around 80% of people will fail to keep their New Year's resolutions. Maybe that's one of yours, is to get connected. They fail that by February. And only 8% of people stick with them for the entire year. The question is, why is that?
Some of it is to do with the why, in terms of discipline or the lack of discipline. But it could also be something deeper that sits at the very core of who we are.
Yeah, we're going to explore that and some more, I'm sure, once again with life coach, author and speaker Jonathan Doyle. It's great to have you back on Momentum, mate. Thanks for coming back.
So good to be here with a couple of my favorite humans, and love listening to your intro. It's just a huge privilege to be able to have these discussions and to encourage and support, all the men listening. And, personally, I've completely figured out all the problems of manhood in life, so it's hard for me to relate to what you're doing. But, for all the mortals out there, because very much on the journey with everybody listening, but great to be back.
And that's why we have you on the show.
I was going to say, I'm proud of your humility.
Yeah.
Actually, the first two shows on YouTube in our Momentum for Men channel is you.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you go on to YouTube, momentum_for_men, and you'll see your smiling face on two of the videos.
Oh, look at that.
Well, yeah.
I think I've lived long enough to realize that, that when God tends to use people, it's rarely because of their own brilliance or success. It's usually because I was speaking in New Orleans a couple of weeks ago, and I said, the message that I was sharing, I said to them, I said to the audience, I'd love to tell you that this message was the result of academic brilliance and hard work. I said, it's just the result of, suffering and being beaten to my knees by life for a long period of time. So whatever I have to offer has come at a cost.
But I think that's for all of us.
Yeah.
Sorry, Des.
No, I was going to say, that's the most important thing. And for men listening, to realize that, what we learn is from the knocks and the tough times. And that's the thing that molds us and shapes us into the people that we become. So
yeah, it does. And look, just on that, I've been using a word recently where I talk about people being safe, by which I mean I'm doing a consultancy project at the moment in another city, and the organization's got a little under 1,000 people in its office, and I'm working with the exec team on a big project that they ran, and a lot of what you hear is kind of how leadership functions and how people treat each other. And one of the learnings that I've taken from that work is that there's a relatively small number of people who are safe particularly men, like who have taken enough knocks and had enough difficulties and sufferings that there's a bit of an ego death. They're not as invested in their own agenda, and you can trust them. They're safe. And I think I'm jumping straight in, but so many of the leadership problems in our world, the structural political problems in our world, are because of people in those positions that, they're just not safe. They haven't been, life may have been hard, but they've taken the wrong lessons from that. And so, I think when life's hard, there's a good chance to learn and soften a bit.
It's good. I have a friend who's, one of his famous sayings is, never trust anyone that doesn't walk with a limp. And it's from the Bible, where Jacob wrestled. And he's like, when people walk with a limp, they've been through some stuff. And, and it generally, like you said, it shapes them in a different way.
Well, I was saying to someone the other day, Tim, I think was it Robert Bly, one of the real progenitors of the men's movement? In his book, Iron John, which is really one of the seminal texts of the men's movement in the late 20th century. And he talked about this thing called the time of ashes, which was, that men often have seasons of success, but then eventually if you live long enough, you get a time when things don't work and stuff's broken. And I think when that happens, you got a few options. You can get resentful, aggressive, angry, bitter, vengeful, judgmental, or eventually you can realize that there is a throne at the center of the cosmos and you're not on it. And once you discover that, it opens up some new possibilities. So I used to hate this message. The last thing I'd say is I used to hate this message. I used to sit at events and I'd hear people go, I've just God's really softened me, and I'm just there going, nah, get off. This is rubbish. Push harder. Anyway.
Actually, I love that phrase. The fact that we don't sit on the throne of anything really. And God's in control, and we just have to do what we need to do and push through.
Yeah. So I'd like to claim that as my own, but it's not. It's my favorite contemporary philosopher is a guy called Paul Kingsnorth, who's very, very good. And that's the quote comes from him. He says, there is a throne at the center of the cosmos, and whatever you put on that throne, you will worship it and call it God.
Wow.
And you got a lot of options. And that's both individually and it's also collectively. So each of us individually will tend to put something there. And, whether it's financial, it's sexual, it's relational, it's power, and then we'll do it as a society too. So I spend a lot of time in the US these days and I love it, but embedded in their founding story is a kind of rugged individual exceptionalism. So kind of at the throne of a lot of that reality is pushing harder, striving harder. And there's some good in that too. So, but anyway, the whole Old Testament is just one group of people putting the wrong thing on the throne over and over again. And so there's nothing new in this. This is a basic archetype of the human journey for all of us. We just got to get the right thing on there.
Yeah, no, that's fundamental, isn't it? It's absolutely core to who we are.
So let's, I love the fact that we always start in one point and we go.
We start light.
All over the place. But let's keep with this, Jonathan, because there'll be guys listening, right? We're starting a new year and we're looking at our lives. And to some degree, some of us will be assessing. Some don't, we just repeat. But for those of us who are assessing and go, wow, what you just said there about putting something on the throne.
Yeah.
What would I look at in my life and how would I discern what I've put on the throne?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind in terms of planning out a new year for men at the macro level, I have two words: usefulness and selfishness. I think one of the things you want to think about is being useful. So I spoke at a leadership event last week and I was really big on that. I said, one of the first things you want to be really thinking about is, am I being useful? Am I a net benefit to the world, or am I basically a pain in the ass and a net drain on reality? So you want to be useful wherever you are. And
pretty
useful,
blunt.
Oh, it's very blunt. Yeah. Well, usefulness, it's relative, right? So you can be a janitor and be incredibly useful, and you can be just kind, and you can be someone that people talk to, and you can have a ministry and a vocation as a janitor. You can be a president of a nation and be useful. So the first thing is to think about, am I being useful in general? Am I a net benefit to the people in my life, to my family members, to my kids, to my wife or partner or spouse? And then the selfishness piece, I think that's just been on my mind a bit lately. It's easy to gradually just drift into this very subtle mentality that life should serve me, people should serve me. We live in a very therapeutic culture. So whenever people are experiencing some form of suffering or discomfort, the default mechanism is blame. It's like there must be a reason for this and someone's causing it. So then I just go to the archetypes. I'd say even if you're not Christian, look at the Christian archetype. The cross itself is what we would say is emblematic. It's communicating in its essence, which is the essential Christian message is that the most powerful force in the cosmos decided to serve, decided to put the needs of others before itself. So life's not complex. You just need to, that's the archetype. And no one's going to do it perfectly. But I think if we try to be generative, in the masculine archetype, we'd say that the feminine is receptive, the masculine is generative. So to be serving, to be sacrificial. And it's in the smallest details. It's in the smallest details of daily life as a man. Like yesterday with my kids, I'm still getting over jet lag, but it's just the small things. I went and bought Monopoly and played Monopoly and just doing those little things that you might prefer to do something else. So usefulness, selfishness, generativity.
That's so good. And, it's if every one of us took an ounce of that and implemented that in our lives, the world would be totally different. It'd be a tour. Yeah. But we don't. You're right. We are selfish and we tend to focus on ourselves. We put ourselves on that throne that we talked about earlier. Yeah. And so, yeah. So,
you go, Tim.
I was just going to say, part of the whole, if we're a person of faith, right, the whole dying to self is something that we're familiar with. But I think, what you're saying there is not just dying to what the Lord wants for my life, but like you said, dying to serving those around us. So, like as husbands, for example, with our wives, we've talked about this on Momentum before. I think the scripture, in Ephesians, where husbands love your wives, wives submit to your husbands. The husbands, the responsibility is firstly on us to love our wives, and then out of that, there's an ease of submission for her. But it's then how do I do that on a day-to-day basis? How do I love my wife sacrificially and doing the things that again I don't feel like doing, like with my wife, my kids, those around me, but dying to self on a moment-by-moment basis, serving those around me will then not in turn just bring a different version of me, but will help bring a different version of them forth too.
It's so good, Tim. As you guys know, I'm turning 50 tomorrow. And many years ago, I heard this older man say that, he said, when men get older, they only ever do one of two things. They either get holy or they get cranky. And I love that. That stayed with me. And my experience has been mostly more cranky than holy in general. So the offer is, who do you want to become over the life project, over the time you have? And so I'll give you a practical example, and I only offer it not in any way to blow my own trumpet, but, Karen's been carrying a huge amount. As you guys know, one of our kids has got a very serious life-changing diagnosis. And so she's been carrying that and really tired. And, yesterday I just sort of put my foot down. I said, Kaz, like I said, when you get home, you got to check out. Like, you're out. I'm doing dinner. I'm hanging with the kids. You're going to bed now. And I did that. It was awesome. And it was really good for her. And I'm going to do it the next few nights until she gets some balance back. But the point is, I'm not a night person. I'm a morning person. So I'm a 3 a.m., 4 a.m. guy. So I can promise you that last night at about 9:30, 10, when I'm just still playing Monopoly and trying to herd cats, my kids are still pretty young. So I'm herding cats, right? I'm
yeah.
So that wasn't pleasant as such, but it was a decision to put the needs of someone else before my own. Now, the last thing on this that's really important is I've been teaching a lot on Neo-Pelagianism, which really simply, Pelagius was a monk in the 4th century who kind of believed that when Christ died on the cross, humans were given absolutely everything they needed to live perfectly. And if they weren't living perfectly, well, it couldn't be Christ's fault. It obviously had to be the individual's fault. And like every heresy, there's a lot of truth in it, but it emphasizes one thing to the exclusion of another. And what it means is develop this theology of striving, which is I should do the right thing and I know what the right thing is. So if I'm not doing the right thing, well, then I've really got to try harder. And that's Neo-Pelagianism. Now, it's really complex because you do need to try. You do need to make decisions and efforts, but you can't do it at the expense of grace, which is a prayerful disposition of wherever the listeners are with their faith journey, like whether you're a Christian or you're a person open to faith. It's this belief that there is a presence, the presence of God that will give us the ability over time to do things that we may not want to do. So it's both and. We need to do practical, obvious things, But when they're hard, don't just assume that the answer is to grit it out and work harder. It's a prayerful disposition to, Lord, help me to love this person. Help me to love this kid. Help me to love this spouse. I don't feel like it. And we're going to fail and we're going to have setbacks and we get up again.
Let's come back to ourselves for a moment, because obviously we carry ourselves with us wherever we go. And, you know, how we think about ourselves will shape how we view other people, right? I mean, generally, often how we treat other people is a filter of how we actually treat or think about ourselves. So let's start with, and something we've kind of touched on before, but core beliefs. How do we discover what our core beliefs might be? Because it's kind of crucial, right? I mean, we're all carrying core beliefs, whatever age we are. And yet some of them might be so faulty or skewed or out of date that they really need to be updated. So how do we start identifying our core beliefs?
Well, we love to indulge ourselves in the illusion of rationality, right? Like we like to believe that we are rational creatures. We always act in our best interest and we see reality as it truly is, right? That's what
that would be great.
I think if you ask people, if you said, so do you think you see reality the way it really is? Like, who's going to say, no, I don't. I'm just completely biased. Right. So we are a mysterious creation. Somebody once referred to us as angels, you know, part angel, part animal. The essential essence of being human is it's a complex composite of, you know, physicality and almost, you know, spirituality, obviously. So these core beliefs, yeah, they're an incredibly powerful template that do shape our lives in the most profound ways. I often think of Carl Jung's famous quote. He said, you know, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will run your life and you will call it fate. It's a brilliant quote. Like, yeah. You know, Jung was a pretty strange cat, but that's good. Like, you know, the unconscious mind is definitely a thing. And the way I used to prove it to people on stage was I'd say, you know, we'd be talking about something and I'd say to them, can you remember where you were on Christmas Day last year? And everybody would suddenly stop and go, yeah, they could, right? And then I would say to them, where was that memory before I asked you? Like, they weren't thinking about that until I primed them and prompted them to think about it. So that memory was obviously stored somewhere and it wasn't stored in consciousness. So there's obviously this huge realm of our experience that exists below the level of our daily conscious mind. And this, of course, is shaped, you know, powerfully by life experiences. It's pretty fair to suggest that obviously our formative years as children, when we're shaping our sense of reality, there is mystery here. Like you can take someone who's had a pretty good childhood, but end up just making horrendous choices, you know, and blowing their life apart. And then you can have people, you know, recommend reading Eddie Jaku's book, The Happiest Man in the World, or go and read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. You know, you can find people that go through horrendous experiences in life, but then somehow cross a parameter, a threshold, and decide to believe different things. So I wish I could give people a really clear answer. I'd definitely say that our core beliefs are very powerful. They shape our sense of reality. You know, I often tell a story of, you know, when my father died, we had a very difficult relationship and we grew up with a lot of poverty and a lot of financial stress. And I remember going into the hospital and he wasn't in a very good way. And we just bought our first house at this point, which was a big deal for us. And I remember saying to him at his bedside, I said, oh, Dad, I bought the house. I said, we settled yesterday. And, you know, he just said to me, he goes, oh, you're an idiot. He goes, you can't afford that. You'll never keep it. You'll never. And those were actually the last words he ever said to me in this world. Wow. And those kind of formative experiences and profound things can shape your sense of who you are. And unless you do the work of critiquing them.
Yes.
And I think that's work. I think I do a lot of journaling again. Like I've just started doing a lot of journaling again. And sometimes it's doing what Jung said, making the unconscious conscious. So I would say to men that there's two ways to do this. I think walking actually is a good thing, going for walks and actually just no music, just thinking, just going, what do I believe about the world? Why am I on my third marriage? It can't just be that I picked the three wrong women 3 times. Like there's got to be something else going on here. Or, you know, why do I drink this much? Or, you know, why do I keep having conflict at work no matter who the boss is? Why does that keep showing up? Like beginning to go, that's courage. You got to have courage to do that. Like people don't want to do it. So I would say that journaling can really help. And then it's, man, I've wrestled with this my whole life. Like I came from a background of a lot of trauma and abuse, and I think I lived most of my life under this sense of God being basically angry and me being, and I've wrestled with that my whole life, and it's just been this constant. I got to keep catching myself doing it, and so I wish I could give you something clearer other than to agree that it's crucially important, and if you don't make the unconscious things conscious, they're going to keep running your life forever.
I think it's really cool what you said about going for a walk and just doing the quiet. Because I totally agree with that, by the way, in terms of isolation time, thinking things through. The other side of it, of course, is having people in your world that you can talk to about those things that are happening in your world. So you got that dichotomy, time on your own, but also time with others. And so it's important we have both, isn't it?
There's something you said that's really, really important. I am on a crusade about this one thing, which is I think we have a cultural crisis of listening. I think I have a big problem with this at the moment because I get paid, like I get really well paid to work with senior exec teams. And I think what I'm really getting paid to do is, I synthesize information, but what I'm really getting paid to do is listen to people.
Yeah.
And I'm not counseling people. I'm just literally listening to them. I'm just giving them a place where they can say things that they can't feel free to say elsewhere. And I've noticed that I'm just on this thing where we're a very therapeutic culture. We are, many of us, I say this very cautiously, paying all sorts of professionals to do something for us that our communities did for thousands of years, which was give us a place to be heard.
Yeah.
I can think of a pastor that I know who's really quite brilliant, amazing skill set, fantastic person. But I've been noticing watching them, and I'm not part of that church, so I'm not whining about it, but I'm just saying they're so busy and moving so fast that I've noticed that they struggle to listen and be present. So one of the things that we can start to really be conscious of, and we really should think about doing for each other, is really getting good at the listening piece.
Yeah.
And you've got to have one or two, Des, I know this is what you guys do so well. You've got to have one or two people in your life. And people just don't interrupt. People like, you tell people something and they go, oh yeah, I've had that problem and this happened. I'm going, no, don't do that. Just don't compare your story to theirs.
Yeah.
Just give them the space and the place and the time to be heard.
Yes.
There's something about being human. We want to be seen and we want to be heard. And I think that's a massive missing piece of our cultural journey at the moment.
It's huge. I just want to let that sink in because I think you're right. I think that's absolutely huge. To be seen and to be heard and fully known and fully loved is huge.
It is so powerful, Tim. It's like if a man feels completely accepted and heard, now that doesn't mean whoever's listening to him is going to give him a free pass.
Yeah.
But, they may say a few days later, they might say, when I've got some ideas about what you've said. Would you like to talk about that? But don't just, I had a conversation with someone the other day and it was quite a deep conversation, but it reminded me of what I grew up with, which was, God bless him, my father, like no matter what I would say to him growing up about a problem, his default response was, oh, you think you've got problems? It's just like, hey, God bless him, right? He didn't have the tools. And it was all the time. And I think there's such a power in listening. And I know that on this podcast, I'm doing all the talking, but if you met me in a different context, I am so darn interested in people. I just find them so interesting. I'm like, I just sit and listen to people and it's a great privilege. So I think we got to start doing it more for each other.
Can I ask you, Jonathan, what was it in you that changed you from where you were with your father in terms of, putting you down, you think you've got problems, I've got problems, to where you are now? Now, you've obviously made a huge leap in terms of your core beliefs, your core attitudes, your engagement with people. What was the driver for that? How did you go through that journey?
I'd say probably 30 years of suffering.
Okay.
It's encouraging.
There's two ways to learn in life, right? You can either hear somebody else's experience and make the changes, or you can do it yourself. And so if anyone's listening feeling slightly deflated right now, don't feel deflated. Just listen carefully and just take the shortcuts. Yeah, look, for me, it was, coming from a background of sexual abuse and trauma, depression, PTSD, anxiety, panic disorder. So it's a great question. And what would my default answer would be grace. I would have to say, really, like I cooperated. So there's a great quote from St. Augustine in the 4th century where he said, he who made you without your cooperation will not save you without your cooperation. So we didn't get a vote if we got created. We never got to choose that part. We do get a vote in whether or not we want to be saved, transformed, redeemed. We get a vote on that. And so by the grace of God and a lot of good people, good priests, good pastors, and an amazing wife, I think God has showed up for me. In New Orleans the other day, I had 6,000 people in the room, and I was reading, I think, from Psalm 18, where it just talked about that the Lord looked down and he saw my distress and led me out into a wide and spacious place. I mean, that's my testimony. I'm turning 50 tomorrow, and that's the testimony that I tried to probably cooperate, but I still struggle, right? Like I still, have the occasional setback, and I still can fall back into, but I would say the big stuff, the depression, the anxiety, that stuff is gone. And grace, I'd love to give you a nice humanistic psychological answer, but I think really that the God who is on the throne at the center of the cosmos has taken a personal interest in me and transformed my life over time.
Brilliant. I love that answer, by the way.
Jonathan, can I bounce off the back of that, and maybe we'll finish with this, because I was going to ask before Des jumped in with that question, was a very similar question to go, how do you overcome those final words from your father when that's the final thing that you hear from him? Like, how do you then, move that forward without holding on to that and that hurting you and stopping you and hindering you? So I just wanted to quickly say, and you talked about grace, and I just want to quickly share, I've shared a bit about my story with my mom, and it was not a great relationship. And when my mom died in January 21, there was a mix of feelings with that, but I'd made peace myself, even though we'd never reconnected and rebuilt the relationship. I'd found peace with that. I'd found the forgiveness piece within that. But I remember last year, it was the strangest thing. I think it was around Christmas time. I don't know why I was opening the refrigerator door to get something out, and I had this moment where I just burst into tears. And in that moment, I apologized to God, and I said, Lord, I'm sorry for the way that I treated my mum as a result of the way that she treated me, because she rejected me first, but then I rejected her back, right? And it was kind of like I'd made peace with that piece, and then all of a sudden in that moment, I realized that I needed to have forgiveness too for the way that I'd responded to the way that she treated me.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting. You say the grace piece, and I know everybody's, there's some horrific journeys, and it does take time and a process and whatever. But I think you're right. I think grace and forgiveness to go, hey, I can look back and go, my mum did the best with what she was given in life, and she didn't have the tools either. And I responded to that in a really poor way. And then I did the same thing. So, you know what I mean? It's like the grace piece and the forgiveness piece, I think you're right. It's huge.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I guess the first would just be to tag the important reality that there is a world-shattering power in forgiveness. And it's something very easy to talk about, to say, oh, well, we should forgive people. And there'll be people listening to this right now who'll be thinking, yeah, but usually what they'll say is, sure, but you don't know, fill in the blank, what I went through, right? So unforgiveness over whatever period of time leads to bitterness and resentment, and it just eats away at you. And forgiveness in itself seems to have this phenomenal psychological power. It is a thermonuclear device in the psychological world. It's a decision to forego your own claim to some kind of justice, in a sense, and to free yourself and others from whatever has caused genuine harm. And I'm putting language around something. It's very simple to use the language, but people's experiences can be very powerful. But all I can say first is that it's an incredibly powerful psychological tool for healing. The word decision, if you talk about making a decision for forgiveness, decision comes from the Latin decisio, which means to cut off from. So if you think of a surgeon makes an incision, a decision is to cut something away. So the decision for forgiveness in its first instance, is a psychological, intellectual, will-based decision to cut off from all of the bitterness, because you're justified, right? Like there'll be people listening, but you don't know what they did. And I go, no, I don't know what they did. And I think you're justified. And always what I would say to people, if they would talk to me after events about this kind of stuff, I would say to them, right, look, you're right. What happened to you is objectively awful. You're right. What they did was horrendous. And then I would say 3 really important words. And now what?
Yeah.
And now what? Like what happens now? Do you just carry this around like luggage and give it to your own kids? Like approximately how much more of your life do you want to carry this around? And so the other thing was many years ago when I was starting to work through all of my own, wounding and trauma, I was talking to this Christian psychologist, and he had this theory called the hero. He said that if you look at generational lines, generational dysfunction just gets repeated, right? So different patterns just get repeated and repeated and repeated. And he said, what you will find is in a certain generation, a particular person will decide that this will not be allowed to continue. And they said, usually it will be the person in the system who's been most harmed by the system, but they will take the system in a new direction. So he said, if you look at an Abraham or a Moses, they break like the reciprocal pattern and they move it somewhere else. So for me, like my son is 14, and I just adore him, and I just absolutely, we're not doing this again. We're not replaying my father and me over again. We're done. So you decide that you're going to be the man that creates the generational change, and finally, just acceptance of my own father's story, like of the trauma in his story, the loss in his story, and just this over time, by God's grace, just a sadness for him, like just, oh my gosh, you never got to live the life that you could have lived because of what happened to you. And so this sadness and peace comes over time. So that's a lot there, but we're not meant to live in this. We're not meant to live in bitterness and resentment. We're just not. It's toxic for us, and it binds us up, and we're not meant to live that way.
Man, there's a lot in there. And I just want to say, as we end the show, if that is bringing stuff up for you, this conversation, the care line number again, 1-800-000-636. That's 1-800-000-MEN. If you need a safe, confidential conversation and you feel like maybe there's something you want to talk about that's not good to talk with your family members or even a close friend, you want someone that's just neutral. The care line is there for exactly that type of thing. 1-800-000-636, and get connected generically. MomentumAustralia.org. There's options there if you want to reach out to us at Momentum. We'll see what we can do to help you out. But yeah, there's been some good stuff in the show. As we always expect when we chat with Jonathan Doyle, we go deep pretty quick and we go in all sorts of different directions, but there's lots of meat in there. And Jonathan, as always, man, thanks for your vulnerability. Thanks for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Love it, guys. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching this week's show, and we hope you subscribe to Momentum so you can find out what's happening in the shows in the future.
Absolutely. And keep an eye on our website too. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find all of our shows and a whole heap of resources to help you on your journey. That is momentumaustralia.org.
Until next time, keep moving forward
with Momentum.